welcome back to the
back.
99.
Yeah, we're back.
I'm here with Bill Neidhart, and
Hello.
I am Briahna Gray. And we're here to talk today a little bit about some of the policies that have been rolled out over the last couple of weeks. There's been a lot, but perhaps the most benchmark of all the benchmark policies has been Bernie Sanders' Green New Deal plan, which has completely set the standard and blown any other plan out of the water when it comes to the scale of what it entails, which uniquely matches the gravity of the task at hand when it comes to stemming the effects of climate change.
Yeah, and this is right ahead of tomorrow night's CNN climate town hall, something that every time we are on here, I feel like it's, half the time it's after a debate, before a debate, and we're always like, where the hell was climate change? Can we talk about, I don't know, an impending climate catastrophe?
Yeah.
So we're finally going to get a chance for that tomorrow night, but we're also going to talk about it here.
Yeah, we are. And for those of you who listen to Hear the Burn, the campaign podcast, you'll know that we released an episode this morning where we talked about climate change. And we had an opportunity to talk to two leading voices on the subject. Kate Aronoff, who is a writer and environmental journalist for The Intercept, and also David Wallace Wells, who wrote the kind of now famous book, The Uninhabitable Earth, in which he really walks us through the stakes of what we're encountering and puts forward kind of the worst case scenarios of what happens if we don't meet the 1.5 degree warming benchmark set by the IPCC recently, just this past year. But before we get into that nitty gritty, I want to say two things. First, know that we're live, and if you recall, you should drop your comments, questions, concerns into the Twitch stream, onto Twitter, onto Facebook, wherever you can find us. But we'll be monitoring those and responding to you as we see them come up. And second, we want to tell you a little bit about a fundraiser that's going on tonight, and I will let Bill take it away.
Yeah. So there's a lot to dig into here. Like as you talked about, right? We released a plan on the Green New Deal. We released a plan around, we previewed a plan around medical debt and forgiving medical debt. We also had what I think is the foundational criminal justice plan revealed. I mean, it's been a busy summer for Bernie.
Yeah.
But this one, Green New Deal, I think, as we'll get to in a little bit with our first interview, is something that is very different compared to every other plan that's been put out there.
Yeah.
And I want to say that there's kind of two major ways that this differentiates itself. One, it averts climate catastrophe. And I really want to drive that point home. I know our next interview will drive that point home. But there's something happening here, and you can ask anyone who just witnessed what's happening with Dorian and all of these climate catastrophe or all these climate impacts that we're seeing. But as has been laid out by every top scientist, if you believe them, if you believe the scientists and the science that they've put forth, you recognize that we have to meet these benchmarks. Bernie put out a plan to do that. But two, and Kate kind of gets to this, and I'm really looking forward to that, is the economic impact that this has. 20 million jobs. That ends unemployment.
Yeah.
Right? So we're not just talking about averting a climate catastrophe, which is something we have to do, a moral imperative, but we also fundamentally change our economy a la the New Deal, right? We keep on saying Green New Deal. Let's not forget the New Deal.
Yeah, a phrase that we keep using in the campaign, and which I hope helps people to understand what's going on, is to really emphasize the idea of a just transition. So much, I think, of the hand-wringing, and we'll get into this in a bit, because there was a lot of hand-wringing about this policy. To the extent that it was covered at all by the mainstream media, a lot of the coverage was, oh my gosh, this is too fantastical, this can never work, by people who I would argue have a vested interest in that being the case. But the reality is, yes, it is a Herculean task, but if you're going to take it seriously, you have to devote a lot of time, money, and thought. And part of that thoughtfulness is about realizing that there are a lot of people who are working in jobs right now to support our dirty energy economy. And that the New Deal aspect of this plan, when we're talking about a Green New Deal, is that it must acknowledge the extent to which you have to provide for the well-being of the people who are going to be disrupted by a green new economy.
Yeah.
And that's why the jobs aspect of it is so central. It's not ancillary. It is really central to what's going on here.
So I actually want to address, what you're hitting on here, this is actually a Facebook comment, but someone mentioned, the national debt, right? So let's talk about the numbers. We're going to get into some myths that we're going to fact check a little later in this. I think that we'll hand out a couple Pinocchios. which are so few and far between these days. But someone mentioned Bernie's Green New Deal. Not only does it kick off a decade of investments that we haven't seen since the New Deal, it also pays for itself in 15 years.
Yeah.
And really primarily doing that by checking the fossil fuel industry that got us into this mess in the first place.
Yeah. So one of the things we learn about in law school, I can say as a former attorney, is this idea of externalities. And in many aspects in the area of like law and economics, what's happening here, the inefficiencies in our system for those who are interested in markets and who aren't so enamored by the idea of democratic socialism, the reason markets don't operate effectively is because companies are not internalizing the damage that they're putting into the world. So there is an added cost to what they're doing, to what they're making, to what they're manufacturing, that is getting paid for by the citizenry, those of us who experience environmental harms, those of us who are having health concerns because of what they put out into the environment, the trees that they cut down, the resources that they strip from us. And so by holding those companies actually accountable through litigation for the harms that they're creating in the world, you are able to actually make them pay their fair share instead of letting them offload those to the rest of Americans.
If I were to say one thing, and I'll say this again throughout this and throughout the entire campaign, but if someone talks to you about costs in the Green New Deal, it is more expensive. It costs more for us not to do anything.
Yeah.
We're talking $69 trillion is one estimate of what it will cost the global economy if we do not act to fix climate change. But you can really factor this into a million different ways. Look at what's happening in the Bahamas right now, right? Look what's going to happen along coastal communities everywhere. It costs more to do nothing than to actually take action.
Yeah, when we're talking about 10 centimeters of sea rise, that means that pretty much all of our coastal cities, and I believe like a third of humans live on coast, some dramatically larger percentage of humans live on coast than they do on interiors for obvious reason, will be underwater. And that's not some far off hypothesis. That is what we are on target for today. When I spoke to David Wallace Wells, part of what was so compelling about his article is he talks like he breaks down each eventuality, right? So, okay, if you're gonna have permafrost that thaws, the reality is that microbes will be released that will could potentially cause plagues that we would have to meet medical need for, and could kill millions, if not billions, of people. There is what he calls the Briahning of New York, where the average temperature in a lot of these cities will become so hot that to go outside would cause people to basically die of heat stroke and boil from the inside out. And these aren't insane eventualities. There are already a lot of places in the world that have become uninhabitable.
You see examples of this everywhere.
And that's why if you care about immigration policy, if you have concern about the largely manufactured crisis at the border, you have to care about environmental. You have to care about climate change as well, because there are already millions of climate refugees, and that number is only going to go up as the conditions worsen.
Yeah. So actually, since we were talking about him, I think it'd be a good time to cue him up and see this interview. It's when you actually first said who you were interviewing, I was like, David Foster Wallace?
No, not David Foster Wallace.
Tell
apparently,
people a little bit more about his work.
So he wrote first this article in 2017 in New York Magazine, and because it was so impactful, it got options into this book called Uninhabitable Earth, where he goes into a lot more detail about what the actual consequences of this climate catastrophe could be. Again, to learn a lot more details, you can listen to the interview that we did on Hear the Burn, which went up this morning, and a video of the interview will be out over the next couple of days. But here's just a clip of our conversation.
We're still so far from where we need to be if we take seriously the UN's, admonition that in order to avert catastrophic warming, we need to have our global carbon emissions by 2030, which means, they say, a World War II scale mobilization against climate change starting this year, 2019. Now, for all of the good feelings that you can have, thinking about the Green New Deal, thinking about Greta, thinking about Extinction Rebellion, I think it's clear that we're still quite far from implementing a World War II scale mobilization. So the path is clear to me. It's through a new kind of politics to a new kind of policy, but we need that very, very quickly in order to avoid some of these truly scary, even catastrophic impacts coming in the next couple of decades.
So my incessant nodding aside, I think that the interview is really informative. I mean, I feel like I'm someone who is conscious of this issue, right? And this is what David said as well. He said, look, when I came to this, I thought of myself as kind of a good liberal who paid attention to the environment, who learned that we needed to save the pandas in elementary school, like any good, 80s, 90s baby. But he didn't fully appreciate the scale of what was going on until he got involved. So you mentioned the pay for earlier, and I just wanted to hit a few more of those points before we move on from that point entirely. So in addition to holding the fossil fuel industry responsible for their own externalities, one of the huge points of savings is to scale back military spending on maintaining our global oil dependence. So right now we're spending millions of dollars on army bases and other kinds of infrastructure that are ensuring our access to dirty energy all over the world, and being able to ratchet that back and provide clean green jobs instead of spending money on basically expanding U.S. imperialism, we'll save a ton. One of the cost points is to all the tax revenue that comes from the 20 million additional jobs that are created through the Green New Deal. Making the fossil fuel industry pay, but also making wealthy and large corporations pay their fair share.
I mean, corporations are one of the primary forces that are polluting the earth, right? Like I got a paper straw in my iced coffee this morning. Okay, that is
it's a soggy treat.
Yeah, everyone has their role that they need to play. But there's something to be said about holding the fossil fuel corporations that got us into this mess, who knew about climate change, the science behind climate change for decades, and actually actively repressed that information. We've seen actual proof of that. If as a slight aside here, if you want to show your support for the Green New Deal and your support for Bernie, check your inbox. We actually just had an email go out for a new Green New Deal sticker. And if you just want to donate while you're watching, live.berniesanders.com, you can go right ahead while watching this live stream and not miss a moment. But, I want to, before we get to Kate in her interview, which I think is fantastic, there's a moment of clarity here when you talk to someone like him where you realize that averting the climate crisis is a matter of life or death. I mean, and that is not an overstatement. And if you're a lawmaker, if you're a politician, if you are running for president, you either need to get serious about climate change or get the hell out of politics.
Yeah.
And that is so clearly the mission here of what Bernie is behind. He's the only candidate right now with a detailed Green New Deal that will create 20 million jobs and avert climate catastrophe, that will meet IPCC guidelines.
Right.
If you are going to spend an hour tomorrow night on CNN at the climate town hall and you don't have that, then what the hell are you doing about it?
Yeah, and let's really clarify what the IPCC wants us to do. It says we are required to do, because people need to be able to kind of make the comparisons between the candidates without
IPCC, a UN organization of scientists globally who have all come together. It's kind of a miracle that they all agree on everything. This is
science.
Yeah, sure.
The miracle of science. But what we need to do, we have to have, and Bernie's plan does, cut in half global emissions by 2030 and be carbon neutral by 2050. Plans that are less ambitious than that are not worth our time. I mean, because the reality is, if we do not do that, that is what we have to do to avoid the worst case scenario, to hold us at 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming instead of 2 degrees, because 2 degrees is the disaster zone. 2 degrees is everything gone awry. And there are people who claim that it's kind of like there's a kind of a fatalist approach.
Yes.
Folks who kind of imply that we're too late.
There's someone who just now, who just said, we're not too late. Well, we're pretty damn close. We have 11 years or so to take this action.
Right. But the point I'd like to make is that for those people who think that the crisis is so extreme that there's nothing we can do about it now because we've been polluting since the Industrial Revolution, and we've come this far. What's the next couple of years going to do? David Foster Wallace really makes this important point to say, and I've heard AOC say this as well. I believe it is 50% of all emissions that we've created occur in the last 30 years within AOC's lifetime, and 80% of all emissions, carbon emissions, have occurred since World War II. So we're talking about very short time frames in which we've been able to do a lot of damage, which also speaks to how crucial the upcoming relatively short time frames are in our ability to turn the ship around.
Yes, and right before we get to Kate, one thing that she's covered very closely, and a couple questions as to how we get this done. Bernie's Green New Deal is one of the few plans out there, in fact, the only one that I've read so far, that is based off the climate justice movement, and supports them and will foster it and create it into a national movement that absolutely brings this forward. And Loons Gaming on the Twitch stream said, I had a great time in the parade with Bernie yesterday, feel the burn. Sure, Loons Gaming is having a good time at a Labor Day parade with Bernie, but I think that also represents what being part of a movement is. It's about showing up, about speaking out, being there, and showing your face as someone who supports this movement. And Bernie's movement, it's something that's, it's Black Lives Matter, it's the disability movement, it's so many different aspects of it. You better believe that the climate justice movement is a foundational part of our campaign. The Green New Deal proves that. Yeah.
So to that point, if you could throw up what's on the screen right now. This is part of why I reached out to Kate. One is we used to work together at the Intercept, but part of it was that she did this great article for the Intercept in which she specifically set out why it is that Bernie Sanders' climate plan is more radical than his opponents, and why, for political reasons, it is therefore more likely to succeed. So let's hear a little bit of her argument on that front. Here we go.
The economy bill, the economy has gotten this mess. Doing right by a lot of people for other reasons too, right? It's like the fossil fuel funded system that we have built is screwing over workers, it's screwing over working people, kind of across the board through sort of, big differences between corporate profits and wages, through, staggering inequality. It's only gotten worse in the last several decades as, along the same timeline that carbon emissions have been put in the air. So to say that actually the world a Green New Deal can build is one that, fixes a lot of other problems in the economy too.
So that point, that is actually politically useful. It's a political draw to be supporting a policy, one that is overwhelmingly popular. An overwhelming majority of Republicans support a Green New Deal, not to mention Democrats. Something like high 90% of Democrats support a Green New Deal. But in addition, the fact that there is this jobs component, the fact that people feel like they will economically benefit from the Green New Deal as well, is why it is a political selling point. So why does the mainstream media keep casting it otherwise?
Yeah, it's interesting. In fact, I want to say a couple weeks ago, Bernie was talking about the need to create these new jobs and a just transition for workers currently in the fossil fuel industry, right? We're talking coal miners and folks who've moved to the Bakken region and everything like that. Trump went there and tried to talk to fossil fuel workers and say, I'm the one for you. I'm the one who's going to continue these jobs. Well, Bernie's Green New Deal has a just transition for fossil fuel workers. And it creates a program where they have jobs that are based on renewable energy. They have training, not to mention that they'll have Medicare for all. Basically, if you want a pro-worker platform for folks who are working in the fossil fuel industry, it's the Green New Deal. It's not Trump's accelerationist disaster plan. Yeah, it's the Green New Deal.
It's the Green New Deal. We're supporting small family farms by investing in ecologically regenerative and sustainable agriculture. We're replacing, I read a galling article, frankly, a couple of weeks ago about how much pollution, the huge percentage of our pollution comes from buses. And that school buses drive a significant percentage of that. And not only that, but the emissions have a direct impact on the cognitive health of developing minds.
Yes.
So we're literally trucking our children around in not just buses that are polluting the planet, but which are polluting their ability to grow up to their full intellectual potential. And one of the points that David Foster Wallace made in his original 2017 article was that at the rate of carbon dioxide in the environment that we are heading for the year 2100, if we don't do anything, the consequence of that will be something like a 20% cognitive decline in our species, right? Like
not great.
This is like, and we're that's not going to happen because we're going to fix it. But to the people, if we could throw this article up, Mia, when you get a chance, this is one of several histrionic pieces that came out. Look, there was minimal mainstream media coverage. I think there was only about 2.5 hours of climate coverage in the whole of 2018, according to a media report. So it's no surprise that very little people actually had any coverage of the Green New Deal. And to the extent that they did, you get stuff like this from the Washington Examiner. Bernie Sanders' version of the Green New Deal will accomplish nothing but for a mere $16 trillion. His substantiated argument, well, his point is that, the point he tries to make is that Bernie Sanders doesn't take into account the fact that there are a lot of polluters all over the world, and the United States is only responsible for a sliver of total emissions.
Yeah.
Of course, he comes to that conclusion by doing control find for the word China and says, well, China is the biggest polluter. Why isn't China in the thing? Well, China comes up in the Green New Deal about 5 times. It's not enough times for Beckett Adams here. But the reality is, if you actually read the Green New Deal, you see that we devote $200 billion to helping less industrialized countries meet the climate goals.
So that's actually a point that I think a lot of folks don't expect and haven't heard from any other candidate yet. Climate change is a global crisis.
Right.
It affects every single human being, no matter what country you live in, no matter where you're from. And if you are running for president of America, you have to have a plan that approaches this from a global perspective. Bernie Sanders is the only candidate out there that reasserts America as a global climate leader and creates a global climate fund that will not only help, America, of course, get to renewable and a more sustainable economy, but will help developing countries do the same, right? And this is always a straw man argument that you see from the right, where, what about the, industrialized countries? You were allowed to do it, but they aren't. Well, you know what? We're actually setting forth a plan that not only gets America to a place where we are creating a more green, sustainable economy, but the entire world, because that's the only way that this works. And again, it gets to the seriousness of this issue. There is no backup plan for failure here. It is what it is.
Yeah, one of my other favorites. I'm sorry, you know me. I can't not do these media criticism hits because at this point, the Washington Post is a little bit of a punching bag. You mentioned earlier in this episode, you made a joke about Pinocchios. I don't know if you've been tracking it, but we've been in a little bit of a back and forth with them about this kind of absurd fact check they've done, where they quoted the exact same number in an article that they wrote earlier this year, having to do with the number of medical bankruptcies there are, and they have twisted themselves into knots to turn this into a falsehood, even though their own fact checkers approved it. But here they go again. The Washington Post editorial board as a whole has indicted Bernie Sanders' climate plan, saying Bernie Sanders' climate plan will take us nowhere. If you scroll down past a summary of the plan, you'll find that their entire argument boils down to these final 3 sentences, which basically says the task is so large that direct government spending on projects is an unconscionable waste. A cursory, like a 16-page plan, cursorily dismissed on the basis of, we climate experts at the Washington Post editorial board have decided it would be wasteful for us to give it a Girl Scout try.
Let's see if this is a waste. What about the $40 billion Climate Justice Resiliency Fund so that frontline communities, especially under-resourced groups, communities of color, Native Americans, people with disabilities, children, the elderly, they will have the funds to recover, rebuild, and prepare for climate impacts, but apparently that's a waste. So I forgot. Let's ignore them. What about a just transition for workers, right? We're talking about guarantee 5 years of a worker's current salary, housing assistance, job training, healthcare, pension supports, priority job placement for people currently working in fossil fuels.
Yeah.
I guess that's, really not enough. the fact that they would write this when this plan pays for itself over 15 years by taking on corruption, provides a more just and fair economy.
Yeah.
It shows that to them, a plan that, quote, takes us nowhere. Well, where the hell do you think we're going?
Yeah.
Because it's nowhere fun and pretty if we don't do nothing.
Yeah, and for those of you watching, like, I'm curious whether you saw any coverage in your world. And if not, where are you getting news about what's happening to the climate? Because I saw, again, this Media Matters report showed that, of the meager 2.5 hours of climate coverage we had last year, one third of it happened in the last 3 months of the year. So it was like a little concentrated spurt at the end, probably because that was when the IPCC conference happened. And then none of it did the work of connecting severe weather events to climate change.
Right.
So like it very, very rarely does the news make that connection, and that includes what we're going through right now with Hurricane Dorian. That there's been very little connection between the relationship of those two things.
And it's so deeply connected. I want to get to a couple comments here because people have been going off in both Facebook and Twitch. Really important comment from Homeless Dave 69. The guy's handsome, 10 out of 10. Oh, I'm sorry, I read the wrong comment. There's someone in there who says DL Gully 411 says, I don't think we have it in us to fix climate change. And he basically says, I feel hopeless about it, to be honest. I understand how something this monumental and a climate catastrophe of this magnitude would make you feel hopeless. But there's two options here. It's to feel hopeless and not do anything about it, or it's to take action, build a climate justice movement that can get this done and pass the Green New Deal. And the other thing I'd add to that is not only are we going to pass the Green New Deal, but on day one, right, as soon as Bernie Sanders is in the White House, we're going to declare a climate emergency. We're going to stop drilling for fossil fuels on public lands, which is something that Trump is really accelerating. And we're going to stop this offshore drilling. And so I understand the hesitation or the fear that you have when discussing climate change, but there is a plan out there that will get us to a more just country and save us from this climate catastrophe. It is possible to stop this from happening. It's right here. Go online and read it.
Yeah, and that's what the science is about. When they set benchmarks for what emission standards we need to meet by certain times, that is because they have studied what the effects will be at those levels of carbon emissions. They have provided us benchmarks for us to meet because that is a goal that will have articulable result, visual, tangible results, And to the extent that there is some confusion, some ambiguity about whether or not those results will actually stop the cataclysm of climate change, that ambiguity is seeded and bred in the exact same way that ambiguity about whether or not smoking actually caused cancer was fomented by the cigarette industry that profited from that kind of confusion. And so I want to be very, very clear. There is a goal that can be met in the exact same way that we met the crisis of the ozone. I'm old enough to remember when a hole in the ozone layer was the worst thing that was ever going to happen. And acid rain and all of this stuff is all we heard about in the 90s. Scientists figured out that it was these chlorofluorocarbons, these CFCs, that were causing problems. We had to all switch out our refrigerators. We had to dispose of them differently. We had to get rid of aerosol cans. We did it. And at the time, people said, oh my gosh.
No way.
No more spray deodorant. What am I going to do? Like, how is this going to work? There's no way Americans could get rid of their hairspray. It was like the 90s. But the reality is they came up with new science, new chemicals to use in a lot of the products that we still use today, and better disposal techniques. And guess what? It closed.
Yeah.
We don't have that same problem anymore.
With the Green New Deal, America maintains its role as one of the primary drivers of technology and innovation. And in fact, it strengthens our role. And it's one of the best ways to do that. I want to go back to a couple comments here. Lana Dell on Facebook says, we cannot afford to be hopeless. I get it, but we need to take action. We need to get to work. I can't agree with that more. That's exactly what this is about. And then Venitus asks or says, stop talking about how to pay for Green New Deal. Stop asking for how we're going to pay for eradicating medical debts or student fee loan forgiveness until you ask the same question on how we will pay for the Pentagon's uncontrolled wars.
Yeah.
Or until you stop asking how we can bail out Wall Street for trillions of dollars.
Yeah.
You know, if we can bail out Wall Street, we can invest in an America that prevents a climate catastrophe. That bailout was supposedly about averting a crisis. Well, we're trying to avert a crisis here. We need to step up. Let's act on it.
Yeah. I think also to that point, one of the reasons why we evoke the New Deal as part of this is because of the mobilization, the massive war effort mobilization that happened around World War II, where the country completely changed its manufacturing structure so that it could actually meet the needs of this war, and also the changes to the economy that manifested as part of the New Deal in a few short years after the war as well. So the point we're making is that America has gone through this before. It has met similarly exigent circumstances and risen to the occasion. And at that time, the people that we think of as the greatest generation weren't sitting around thinking, well, we probably can't beat the Nazis. We're probably not good enough. America's not up to the challenge. And there are people who might balk at characterizing this moment as requiring a similar kind of patriotism. But if you think of it, I'd like to think of it as a belief in self. I push back against certain notions of American exceptionalism, but it certainly is exceptional the way that we were able to meet various technological challenges over the course of our history. They describe this as a moonshot. We won that race to the moon. Right. But the circumstances here, the stakes here are infinitely more exigent than our ego getting bruised because Russia got to the moon first. Right. We might all be having to live on the moon, as Elon Musk is already planning for us to do, if we aren't able to get our act together. And of course, not all of us are going to make it to the moon. Those of us who have Elon Musk money will, and we know what's going to happen to the rest of us. So it's up to the rest of us to use the fact that there are many of us and few of them, to use our voting power to make sure we get somebody in office who is meaningfully committed to what it takes to actually get a plan in place that is going to enable us to meet the IPCC deadlines and keep us to 1.5 degrees Celsius, because the consequences, if we don't, are going to be much more costly and frankly existential, devastating for millions, potentially billions of people on this globe.
All right. So let's reset a little bit here. We're talking about this tonight, climate change, the Green New Deal. Tomorrow night on CNN, there is a 7-hour climate change town hall. 10 of your favorite candidates will be given the chance to speak about climate change at length. Only one of those 10 candidates has a Green New Deal plan that averts climate catastrophe and creates 20 million new jobs, it meets IPCC deadlines, etc. So you're going to hear attacks, believe it or not, on the Green New Deal tomorrow night.
Yeah.
There are multiple candidates out there who don't support the Green New Deal, actually actively oppose it, or present these really weak middle ground plans. Yeah. So I want to get to a couple frequently asked questions and lies pushed by Donald Trump and other opponents of the Green New Deal. So first, I want to just recall Donald Trump the other day talking about wind energy. Quote, all of a sudden it stops. The wind and the televisions go off, and your wives and husbands say, darling, I want to watch Donald Trump on television tonight, but the wind stopped blowing. The wind's not the only thing blowing in that statement. It is unbelievably dumb. And he also said that windmills cause cancer. Yep. Trump has also said, the environmentalists will soon tell the truth about windmills because they kill all the birds. They kill all the birds.
You get thrown in jail for shooting a bald eagle, he says, in California. But the windmills, they're just chopping them up left, right, and center.
Unbelievable. It is easy to make light of Donald Trump's jokes about windmills. However, what he is implicitly saying, and what he was saying directly after these results, is that he's going to use, quote, clean, sustainable natural gas. He's talking about upping fracking. Josh Fox, a great filmmaker, he made Gasland, right? That showed the impact that fracking has on families, on children who are drinking poisoned water. Fracking's not a solution.
Yeah.
And any candidate who doesn't ban fracking, and there are multiple that you will hear from tomorrow night who are Democrats who do not ban fracking, that is a complete failure.
Yep.
Putting up windmills, which I see all across Iowa every time I'm there. Whenever we do events, between one event and the other, we drive by these incredible windmills that are sustainable, provide reliable energy, and the fact of the matter is that when we have an economy built on the Green New Deal that has solar, hydro, wind, it's not going to shut off when the sun sets and when the wind doesn't blow.
Do we have to explain science of freaking windmill? Sorry, it's
trying to.
Do you know the genesis of his windmill hate, of Trump's windmill
I'm
hate?
sure it's his property value.
Yeah, apparently he had a golf resort in Ireland, and they were building a bunch of windmills off the shore, and it obstructed his resort side view. And ever since then, he has been in this campaign against windmills. And in fact, he lost a lawsuit with, I think, the EU about the building of those windmills and was forced to pay the legal fees for the complete unnecessary litigation. And so it is his cross to bear ever since then. It's a personal vendetta. He really is the Don Quixote of presidential
Don
candidates.
Quixote. Yeah, just so brave, charging at the windmill. All right, myth number 2 that you are likely to hear tomorrow night and going forward as we talk about the Green New Deal, something that we have already discussed here, is the bottom line cost. Mm-hmm. Well, we are here for solutions and things that we can get done, and gosh darn it, folks, we just can't get this done. Mm-hmm. Again, $16.3 trillion in public investment paid for over 15 years. Meanwhile, the cost of inaction's over $60 trillion worldwide. Yep. So you do the math. I think we're actually saving, if we don't take action, we'd lose $34 trillion in economic activity by the end of the century.
Yeah.
The benefits are massive. We're talking, bold and decisive action that will save $2.9 trillion over 10 years. Mm-hmm. $21 trillion over 30 years, and $70.4 trillion over 80 years. But sure, tell me how it's too expensive to save $70 trillion.
Yeah.
It's just the impact that climate change is going to have is going to be massive, as Kate talked about with the economics. The Green New Deal, modeled after the New Deal, which was the single largest economic program proposed by a president, is going to completely rebuild our economy. So the cost argument, when you hear it tomorrow night, roll your eyes, because that's the actual amount of thought that has gone into it.
If people bring up costs, I would push you to ask them if they think that America as we know it today is worth it. Do you think that maintaining the American way of life as we know it today, without us all packing up and moving to Alaska or what have you, or Greenland if that purchase comes through?
Yeah. I mean, the little, the lower third here, the bottom line cost of saving the planet.
Yeah.
What is the cost of that?
Yeah.
The cost of inaction is greater than anything else.
Yeah.
So moving on to the next myth that you'll likely hear tomorrow night, and we've already kind of addressed it, is, but we can't get this done. Mitch McConnell's so scary, and it's just tough. In Washington, you got to pat each other on the back and talk to segregationists to get stuff done. Well, no, I'm sorry, but have you heard of the Sunrise Movement?
Yeah.
I mean, part of what we are doing here, talking about the Green New Deal, having a climate town hall that's 7 hours on CNN tomorrow night.
And we can talk. We should circle back to why we're having a 7-hour.
Sure, right.
Instead of just having a climate-themed debate.
Moving forward with what we have, that's not possible without the folks at Sunrise Movement.
Yeah.
Sunrise Movement, which a lot of you know because of AOC. Mm-hmm. I know because we actually work with some folks who helped start the Sunrise Movement. They're in the office and they're incredible. They help make this happen, but Bernie's plan, like we said earlier, is based in the climate justice movement. And When you do that, when you base a public policy off of building a movement and demanding that it gets done, well, we were just in Mitch McConnell's backyard in Louisville this last month, and that's what it's going to take to get it done. Bernie Sanders, not only will he be commander-in-chief, he'll be organizer-in-chief, and that's exactly how we get this done. And he'll be the only one who comes forward with that solution, creating a grassroots movement to demand this progress, but also give a detailed plan that we can pass.
Yeah, I want to really drill down and connect the dots on that for people, because there is this way that we kind of say it will take a movement, it will take a revolution, without necessarily people understanding exactly what's entailed. So do you remember approximately how many people were at that rally in Kentucky when you say Mitch McConnell's backyard? You're saying Bernie was able to turn out crowds in his district.
Yes.
That were in the thousands, like overwhelming, gate straining crowds.
Yes.
And what Bernie Sanders does, what he says when he goes there, is he says, look, people ask me how this revolution is going to happen. How it happens is by putting the actual political pressure on Mitch McConnell so that he fears his re-election chances if he doesn't do what is overwhelmingly popular, not just for Democrats in this country, but for Republicans. And I'm going to come back here to his district when I am president, continue to hold rallies, and make it very clear that he is the one that's betraying the desires of his constituents. That is what politics is. That's what it means to lead, to provide leadership in the course of a revolution. The buck doesn't stop the day you ascend to the White House. It means you're now in a position to use the highest pulpit in the land to continue to direct attention on these people in localities across the country. And that's, frankly, the moderate success of the Tea Party movement, which was to pressure people individually across the country to adhere to a far-right agenda that was even more to the right of the American populace. Bernie is going to be infinitely more successful because what he is arguing for is genuinely progressive politics that are supported by majorities of Americans. And that, my friends, works.
Speaking of the people, I just want to dive back into here to the comments. I mean, I loved being back today. A great show. A ton of folks sharing their thoughts. Lemius on Twitch wants to know if Bernie will be the first gamer-in-chief in addition to being organizer-in-chief. It depends on what you mean by gamer, but if you mean standing in solidarity with game developers who are demanding the right to a union and fair wage, then yeah, first gamer-in-chief for sure.
Yeah, and for those of you who don't know, you should go back and listen to the episode of Hear the Burn, where we talked to Jim Sterling and Hassan Piker, big Twitch folks with good leftist politics.
And someone's asking, when's the next protest? Well, whenever the hell Bernie comes to your town. But also go on map.berniesanders.com and you will find solidarity events near you where you can stand in solidarity with workers, or you can hold a community canvas and organize for Bernie, where you can meet fellow Bernie supporters and progressives who want to fight for a Green New Deal. I know on Labor Day weekend, thousands of supporters turned out to over 60 events that we held in solidarity with workers and unions across America, including multiple events in California, where Kaiser healthcare workers are preparing for what will be the largest strike in California in 20 years. And we absolutely stood in solidarity with those healthcare workers. So if you're looking for a way to act, sure, donating to our campaign is massively helpful. Again, if you're on live.berniesanders.com, you can watch this and do it at the same time. But also volunteering and going to map.berniesanders.com and finding an event by you. That's always the way to go.
Yeah. The audience that this medium attracts tends to be younger. And so what I would put to you, and what Bernie Sanders says all the time, is that if our generation voted in the same numbers as people who are 50 plus, then this would be a radically different country, right?
Yes.
A radically better country, I would argue. And so even if you're on the fence, I would put to you that you absolutely need to think critically about how you're talking to the people in your environment about registering to vote, checking your state's primary voting deadlines. Some states like New York, where I'm from, require you to register as a Democrat very early, I believe in October, in order to vote in the primaries. You don't want to get caught unawares because it's so early that a lot of us aren't paying attention yet to the race. It's important to get yourself situated so that when it comes time to vote, you are able to vote, and also get your friends and peers to vote with you. Are you in college? You know, can you knock on the doors of people in your dorm? Bring it up at like a conversation in the lunch hall. You know, put some flyers in the open mailboxes that exist in your dorms. Think about the ways.
Or go to the college tailgates, little plug, that Bernie's holding across Iowa this weekend. We'll be at 3 different college campuses, northern Iowa included, and hopefully Iowa State, and we'll be around. And join us there. We'll have Bernie Sanders himself. So young people.
I mean, I was just reflecting on this. I was just in a meeting about kind of some of the college organizing strategy, and I was trying to reflect on what would have provoked me to be more involved than I ever was in college. You know, the first opportunity I had to vote was in 2004, Bush 2 second term, and I remember realizing way too late in the game, because I was a hapless 18-year-old, that I was in Massachusetts and I was registered in New York, and I hadn't filled out absentee vote.
Oh yeah.
It just hadn't occurred to me basically till voting day, and I didn't vote. Now, and I remember, 4 years later, how important it was to me, not just because, it was Obama, but because I, subsequently became a more political being as I was in college and as I was in law school, and became a different and more mature person. But I would say that this is a different kind of political environment than it was back then. It's not just about laughing at the Daily Show. There's some real stakes at hand, and I wouldn't want you to be caught in the same situation that I was caught in. So think about it now and talk to your peers is what I would say.
So just to kind of round things out here, a couple more comments that I think really drive home what we're talking about today. Elliot on Twitch said, the Green New Deal, not only will you have a good job for you, and people won't die.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good outcome. And then Jim on Facebook said the Green New Deal is real and attainable. We have to do it.
Yeah.
So let's make it happen.
Yeah. And to your point about the activism of the Sunrise Movement, that's again something that's happening with people of your generation, of, if you're charitable, our generation. And I want to make the point, and we make it on the podcast, about why it is that we're having the 7-hour marathon instead of a climate debate. It has to do with the DNC voting down the resolution for a climate debate that the Sunrise Movement advocated for really persuasively a couple of weeks ago in California. And unfortunately what you saw was, a member of the DNC panel who was making this decision, who, works for the, Biden campaign, who was actively, articulating moderation. That, there was a procedural concern that we should have talked about this at an earlier meeting, and we can't make these kind of decisions now. That if you have a debate on climate change, we're going to have a debate on everything in the world. We'll have to have maybe a Black woman debate, and a Latinx debate, and a Native American debate. And so that I would say, one, I wouldn't be so knee-jerk, trigger happy about the fact that we shouldn't perhaps have more debates centered on communities and interests and needs that are widely important, but not really focused on, except for kind of like personal attacks about segregation or what have you, or busing or what have you. But that if you're talking about issues that are important to the Black community or the Latinx community, climate change is at the heart of that.
Yes.
And that Black and Latinx and Native communities are disproportionately burdened by the effects of climate change for all of the reasons of structural inequity that you are pretty familiar with at this point. And that climate change and racial justice isn't just ancillary to Bernie Sanders' Green New Deal plan. It is at the heart of it. It is a racial justice plan, and we have to start thinking of and talking about these issues in a much more intersectional way. Not just saying the word intersectionality because it sounds good, but practicing it as a political matter that is the root of solidarity.
And just one last comment, Jim, who we mentioned earlier on Facebook, he just wants to know it's not just the younger folks. Jim is 58.
Good for you, Jim.
58 and on Facebook leaving comments. Why not?
Another
part of the movement.
Another somewhat older person who is interested in climate change. You might have heard of him. Bernie Sanders.
That's true. I mean, he tweeted today, I have 7 grandchildren and I'll be damned if they inherit a world that's not inhabitable.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So I think that's it for this hour. I really appreciate all of you guys coming to talk to us. Let us know if you have any more thoughts, questions, or concerns. We're always happy to talk to you on this Twitch stream, and we want to make sure it's as beneficial and useful to you as possible. So we're going to start coming back. I know we've had a little bit of a hiatus on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So if you want to be ready with questions or, invite groups of your friends or whomever to come and watch kind of as a community, we'd love it to be a kind of direct dialogue. And the more questions that we get that are like, substantive questions.
I mean, that one comment, Trump bad. All right, we're starting with something.
There is stuff. Like I saw someone earlier who was saying that he's a Trump voter, but that he appreciated us having this Twitch stream. And I appreciate that comment.
Sure.
There are a lot of people who were Obama voters who are also Trump voters, right? That's the whole point, that, like 25% of the white voters that Obama got were lost in 2016. And, I'm not one for kind of deplorables comments. I think that climate change is a really good example of how there are issues that people across the political spectrum really care a lot about. And I would argue that such an existential issue should be the kind of issue that is what you vote on. If you were a single issue voter, it makes sense for it to be climate change, and that militates in favor of voting for someone like independent senator from Vermont, Bernard Sanders.
So catch Bernie tomorrow night at 8:40 p.m. Eastern on CNN during the CNN Town Hall. Keep in mind what we talked about here, and then we will see you on Thursday.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Have a good one.